I still remember the way the wind moved that evening. Slow, heavy, as if it carried something it didn't want to let go. Idaho has a quiet that settles into the bones, a silence that makes every thought echo just a little louder than it should. I've lived here most of my life, and I thought I understood that silence. But after what happened with Noah Calder, I hear it differently now, like it's waiting for me to admit that some moments don't fade, no matter how far behind they are. All it takes is a certain kind of dusk, the kind we get in late autumn, and I'm right back there again. I've been a steady man most of my years. Routine, small habits, long drives on empty roads. Nothing about my life ever hinted that I'd be the one someone would run to after seeing something impossible. But sometimes, the strange chooses people without asking if they're ready. And the night Noah came back trembling, with his breath uneven and the world drained out of his eyes, I realized that the impossible doesn't need permission. It just arrives, and you're left trying to decide whether you're witnessing a moment or a fracture. There was something about the way he held himself that unsettled me more than anything he eventually said. His hands weren't just shaking. They were gripping the air, as if he was trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through his fingers. He stood under the weak porch light like someone who had outrun a storm only to find it waiting for him here. And though I didn't know it then, the worst part wasn't the fear on his face. It was the certainty, like he wasn't guessing at what he'd seen, like it was carved into him. Noah had always been quiet around town, a kid with a guitar case too worn for his age, a softness in his voice that felt at odds with the hard edges of this place. I'd noticed him a handful of times at the diner or by the general store, always with that distant look musicians carry when they're still trying to believe the world has room for them. But that night, everything about him looked contradicted, as if whatever he'd witnessed had separated him from himself. He didn't step inside at first. He just stood there, looking past me, past the walls of my house, as if searching for the version of his life he still hoped was real. I didn't know what he'd seen, not yet, but I knew, by the way the cold clung to him, that time hadn't offered him a glimpse of wonder. It had shown him a truth he was never meant to witness. And the moment he finally spoke, I understood why some memories don't wait for permission to haunt you. Noah stood inside the doorway for a long time before he spoke. His breath was uneven, clouding in the cold air that followed him inside, and the look on his face was something I hadn't seen on anyone in years. Fear so quiet it barely knew how to show itself. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, melting in slow drops onto the floor. He held his arms close to his chest as if he was trying to keep something inside from falling apart. He sat at the kitchen table without waiting to be asked. His hands were shaking, but not from the cold. There was a kind of trembling that came from somewhere deeper, and that was the kind he carried. When I offered him a cup of hot water, he held it carefully, like the warmth was something unfamiliar. For a while, the only sounds in the house were the soft tapping of melting snow and the faint hum of the heater. Noah kept his eyes lowered, studying the steam rising from the cup as if it might tell him what he couldn't bring himself to say. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked on the first word, then settled into something barely above a whisper. He said he had seen something impossible, and the moment he tried to describe it, his hands tightened around the cup. He talked about a place that looked like our town but worn down, older, emptied. He talked about seeing himself there, older, tired, sitting alone on the steps of a building he didn't recognize. And he talked about the feeling that he wasn't the only one standing in that moment. He didn't ask if I believed him. He just looked at me with the kind of desperation that comes from knowing a truth no one should ever have to carry alone. And I understood, in a way I wasn't ready to admit out loud, that whatever had happened to him didn't end on that road. It had followed him here. Hi, my name is Caleb. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep these memories alive. What do you think? If you could see one moment from your future, would you want to? Thank you for being here with me today. Now let's return to the story. Noah sat at my kitchen table for a long time without saying anything else. The steam from his cup drifted upward in thin, uneven lines, fading into the dim glow of the overhead light. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the house, lifting patches of snow from the yard and carrying them across the fields like pale ghosts. Nights in Idaho can feel endless, but that night felt even longer. like time was taking slow steps around us, listening. He kept rubbing the edge of the cup with his thumb. Not in a nervous way, but in a way that made me think he was trying to remind himself of where he was, as if physical contact with something warm might anchor him. Eventually, his breathing settled a little, though his shoulders stayed tight, like they hadn't yet received permission to relax. "You won't believe this," he said quietly. His voice was rough, like he'd been shouting or crying before he got to my door. But I didn't know who else to come to. I told him to take his time. It wasn't the kind of sentence you answer quickly. For the next few minutes, he kept looking toward the window. There was nothing out there, just the dark yard, the fence, the silent road. But his eyes tracked it as if something might appear again, something that didn't belong to this hour or this place. I didn't interrupt him. Sometimes the way a person looks at the world tells you more than their words. And what I saw in him was someone trying to convince himself he was still in the right timeline. When he finally spoke again, he didn't start with the strange part. He started with the simple things. The walk he took that afternoon, the headphones he wore, the song he was working on in a notebook. I could see it clearly as he described it. The quiet back road, the pale grass at the edges, the way the late light in February looks like it's running out of color. Noah had always been the kind of kid who needed calm around him when he thought. Music seemed to be one of the few places he allowed himself to be loud. "I wasn't trying to do anything weird," he said, almost apologizing. "I wasn't messing with anything. I swear. I was just thinking. I was trying to remember the melody I wrote last night." He set the cup down and pressed both hands flat against the table. His fingers were still shaking. "There was this shift," he whispered. "Like the air got pulled tight, like everything around me was taking a breath at the same time." I leaned in slightly, not to push him, but because something in the room changed when he said that. The air seemed colder, as if the words themselves had carried some of that other place back with them. "Next thing I knew," he continued, "the road wasn't the same. The sky wasn't either. It was like the world moved 30 years ahead, but I didn't." His hands curled into fists, not from anger, from impact, from memory. He said the small pine trees that lined the road were taller, much taller. The fence on the right side was gone. The dirt path he always used had been replaced by cracked pavement. The sky looked the same, but older, dimmer, as if time had worn it down. And the quiet had changed too. Not the comfortable quiet of Idaho evenings, but a hollow one, like sound had stopped trying to belong there. "It was my town," he said, "but it wasn't my town." He took a shaky breath, staring at a knot in the wooden table as if it were the only thing that felt stable. "And I saw him," Noah whispered. "I saw me, older, sitting on the steps of a place I didn't recognize. Same jacket, same hair, same face, just worn out, like someone had taken the music out of him, piece by piece." The kitchen seemed to shrink around us. The heater clicked in the hallway. Somewhere outside, something light hit the porch rail. "And he wasn't doing anything," Noah said. "He wasn't fighting. He wasn't trying. He was just sitting there, like someone who had stopped believing he had a right to want anything." He swallowed hard. "That's what scared me the most," he whispered. "Not that I saw the future, but that I saw myself already giving up." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house felt strangely small, like the walls had leaned in just to hear the rest of what he wasn't saying. I'd lived long enough to know when someone was struggling to find the right shape for their thoughts. Noah wasn't confused. He wasn't guessing. He was piecing together something that didn't fit the world he knew, and it was cutting him on the way out. I pushed the cup a little closer to him. He didn't drink, but he kept his eyes on it as if the warmth might steady him. Outside, the wind moved along the siding in low waves, brushing against the windows like a reminder of the night waiting for him once he left. I wondered if he had felt that same wind in the future he claimed to see. "How close were you to him?" I asked softly. He hesitated. His fingers twitched on the table. "Close enough to hear him breathe," he said. "Close enough to tell it was me and not just someone who looked like me." There was something unsteady in his voice. Embarrassment, maybe, or grief. Sometimes they sound the same. He rubbed his palms together, trying to make sense of a moment that shouldn't exist. Then, with a small exhale, he said, "He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and didn't care." The quiet that followed settled deep. I could feel it filling the room, heavy and slow. Noah finally lifted his gaze, and there was a shine in his eyes that reminded me of the first signs of frost. Clear, fragile, waiting to fall. "I thought," he began, but the rest of the sentence broke apart before it reached me. He swallowed hard. "I thought I'd see something different. I thought I'd see proof that things get better. That if I keep practicing, keep trying, something will happen. Something good." His voice cracked at the edge of those words. He shook his head, almost angrily, like he was trying to push away the memory of the older version of himself. "I always told myself I'd make it someday," he said, barely above a whisper. "Not big, not famous, but something. A small gig, a song on a local station, something that proved all the hours meant something." He looked down at his hands again, long fingers, the kind musicians carry quietly. But the person I saw, he wasn't playing anything. He didn't even have his guitar with him. He was just empty. I let him breathe through it. He needed silence more than advice. Advice can feel like a shove when someone is trying not to fall apart. "When I first picked up a guitar, I thought it was supposed to save me," he said. "From my dad, from the quiet in the house, from feeling like I didn't belong anywhere." But me, looked like someone who had been saved once and forgot how it happened. His eyes drifted again to the window, chasing a thought I couldn't see. The snow outside had begun to fall in wide, slow flakes. Soft, almost hesitant, like they were trying not to interrupt. "I wanted to call out to him," he said. "I wanted to ask him what happened, why he stopped, what made him quit. But I couldn't move. My chest felt tight, like something was wrapped around it." He pressed his hand lightly against his ribs, remembering the pressure. "I don't think I was supposed to be there." I asked, "What made you come back?" He blinked, surprised by his own answer. He stood up, and when he did, he looked older than he should have. Not in years, just tired, like he'd been carrying something that didn't belong to him. He paused, then added, "I didn't want to see what he did next. I didn't want to know the moment he finally let go of everything." He drew in a long, shaky breath and looked at me as if I were the only stable point left in his world. "I think I came back the second I realized it wasn't just a future," he said. "It was a warning." Noah's last words hung in the air like a draft that wouldn't settle. A warning. I'd heard people use that word about storms, about long drives on icy roads, about the sharp turns that cut through the mountains, but I had never heard someone use it about their own future. Not with that kind of weight. He pushed the cup away gently, as if his hands no longer trusted themselves to hold anything. The faint clink of ceramic against wood sounded louder than it should have. A strange thing happens when someone tells you they've seen themselves break. Your body reacts before your mind does. My shoulders tightened. My breath slowed. Even the house felt like it leaned closer. "What do you think it means?" he asked. The question was raw, soft, vulnerable in a way that made it clear he wasn't looking for logic. He was looking for something human enough to hold on to. I didn't answer right away. I watched the frost gather along the window's edge, forming thin branching lines that looked like cracks in frozen glass. "It means you're scared," I finally said. "And you came here because you didn't want to carry that alone." He nodded without lifting his eyes. "I don't want that to be me," he said. "I don't want to become someone who stops trying." His voice weakened at the last words, like he was ashamed of them. "You're not him yet," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And maybe seeing him is the very thing that changes where you end up." But Noah didn't look reassured. If anything, he looked more unsettled. He ran a hand through his hair, pulling it back from his forehead like he needed his vision clear to think. The sleeve of his jacket slid down just enough for me to notice a smudge of dirt on his wrist. Fresh, as if he'd fallen or braced himself against something when the world shifted under him. "There was something else," he whispered. "Something I didn't tell you yet." His fingers curled inward again, slowly, like he was struggling to pull the words out from a place in him that still resisted. When I was staring at him, at the older me, I heard something. Not from him, from somewhere behind me. His posture tightened. A memory ran through him in a visible shiver. It sounded like a door shutting. Not a loud door, more like a shed door or an old wooden one. But the sound didn't match anything around me. There was nothing there that looked like it could have made it. My stomach pulled in slightly. Not fear, not yet, but the uneasy feeling that a detail had just been added to the picture that wasn't supposed to fit. He continued before I could speak. And right after I heard it, he said, the air changed again, like that first shift, except this time it felt faster, harder, like the world corrected itself and pushed me back. He looked down at his hands, then turned them palm up as if expecting to find something marked on them. I didn't run, he said. I didn't choose to come back. It was like something just pulled me out of there. The heater clicked on again, sending a warm current through the quiet room, but he didn't seem to feel it. His eyes stayed low, unfocused, as if he were still half inside that moment. Caleb, he said softly, what if it wasn't just the future I wasn't supposed to see? What if something else was there? I leaned back slightly, letting his question settle between us. There are moments when someone hands you a truth they don't fully understand yet. Moments when the weight of what they're saying feels larger than the room can hold. This was one of them. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and indifferent, covering the world in a thin, pale layer, quieting everything but the thoughts we could no longer avoid. What did you feel? I asked. Right before it pulled you back? He hesitated only for a breath. Like someone closed a door behind me, he said, and didn't want me staying there any longer. The snow had thickened by the time I walked to the window. It fell in slow swirls, drifting sideways in the wind, turning the fields into a pale, shifting landscape. Nights like that used to calm me. They made the world feel gentler. Like everything outside, the glass had softened. But with Noah sitting at my kitchen table, small and shaken under the dim overhead light, the snow felt less like a blanket and more like a quiet barrier, something pressing us inward, keeping the world small and close. I watched the road for a long moment, pretending I was checking for ice or for headlights. Truth was, I just needed a second to gather myself before asking what I knew I had to ask. Noah didn't look up when I came back to the table. His breathing had steadied, but his posture still carried the weight of that future he shouldn't have seen. What did the place look like? I asked carefully. Where your older self was sitting. He rubbed his hands together slowly, thinking. It was a building, he said. Small. The roof looked worn. The paint was peeling. It felt abandoned or forgotten, like nobody had walked through the door in years. I waited. Details matter more when they're attached to fear. There was a single light on inside, he added. A weak one, like the kind that's left on by accident. His eyes drifted toward the window again, though he wasn't looking at the snow. He was looking at memory. I don't think it was a house, he continued. It felt more like a place people used to meet. Maybe a little performance space, or a hall, somewhere that used to matter. I felt a quiet click inside me, something subtle aligning. A place once full of sound, now silent. A place a musician might carry inside them like a wound. And you're sure it was here? I asked. In town? He nodded. The mountains looked the same. The air felt the same, but everything else looked older, more used up. The kitchen clock ticked in the background, slow and steady. I'd never been aware of its sound until that moment. Now each tick seemed to measure the space between us. Noah, I said gently, has this happened before? His reaction was small, almost unnoticeable. A slight tightening of his jaw, a brief hesitation before answering. Not like this, he said, but sometimes, I don't know. Time feels strange. Places feel out of order. I'll be walking and suddenly feel like I've stepped into a moment that doesn't match the one before it. He shook his head. I always blamed it on stress, or my dad, or just being tired. He paused, then added, my dad wouldn't believe me anyway. The way he said it was soft but not bitter, resigned, like someone who had tried reaching out before and learned not to expect much. Harold? I asked. He nodded. He thinks music is a hobby, something I'll outgrow. He says people here don't make it doing things like that. I leaned back slightly, letting his words settle. Small towns can be kind, but they can also be heavy. Dreams grow differently in places where everyone knows your last name before you even speak. And when you saw your older self, I said, did it feel like a future carved in stone? Or just one possibility? His breath caught, and for a moment he didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice was quiet and tired. It felt like something that had already happened, he said, like I wasn't watching a possibility. I was watching a memory I haven't lived yet. I didn't know what to say to that. The room felt colder, though the heater was still humming. Noah ran a hand along the edge of the table, grounding himself again in the present. "There's more," he said after a moment. "Something I didn't notice at first. When I looked at him, older me, he wasn't just sitting there. He kept looking at the ground, like he'd dropped something, or lost something." He swallowed hard. "And I think, whatever he was looking for, he never found." Noah went quiet again, as if speaking the last part had taken more out of him than he expected. His fingers traced the grain of the wooden table, following its uneven lines like he was trying to read something written in them. Outside, the snow had shifted directions, now falling almost straight down, soft and steady. The sky had that heavy look it gets before a long storm settles in. "What do you think he lost?" I asked gently. He opened his mouth to answer, but then closed it again, uncertain. "I don't know," he said finally. "At first I thought maybe it was something small, like a piece of paper or a pick. But the way he kept staring at the ground," he shook his head. "It felt heavier than that, like he was looking for something that mattered." He leaned back in the chair and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his palms. He looked exhausted, not just physically, but in the way people look when they've seen something they can't fit inside their own understanding. The kind of tired that doesn't come from a long day, but from a moment that rearranges you. "I tried to talk," he said. "I tried to call out to him, but I couldn't make a sound." His fingers curled slightly. It was like my voice wasn't part of that place. I felt a thin tension at the back of my neck. Not fear, exactly, just the quiet realization that his experience wasn't random or simple. "Did he move at all?" I asked. "Only once," Noah said, right before everything pulled me back. He lifted his head, but not toward me, toward the door behind him. He glanced at me, searching my expression, like someone else was there. The statement hung between us, heavy, unsettling. The idea that Noah had seen himself was already more than most people could process. The idea that there might have been someone, or something, else in that moment with him added a colder layer to the night. "Did you see the door?" I asked. "No," he said, but I heard it again, that soft closing sound, like it was reminding me I didn't belong there. The heater hummed in the corner. His breathing steadied, but his shoulders stayed tense, as if part of him was still braced for another shift, another tear in the world he knew. I poured a little more hot water into his cup and nudged it again toward him. This time he wrapped his hands around it, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. His knuckles were scratched, I realized. Small marks along the skin, as if he'd stumbled or grabbed onto something rough on his way back. "You said the air changed before you returned," I said. "Can you describe it?" He thought for a long moment. "It felt like pressure," he said, "like the world was tightening around me. And then there was this sound, like fabric pulling, or something stretching too far." He looked down, embarrassed. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you're trying to describe something you weren't meant to understand," I said. He let out a shaky breath, grateful for the lack of disbelief. "I didn't want to leave," he admitted, even though it scared me. I wanted to figure out why he was there, why he looked like that, why he had stopped trying. His voice softened. I wanted to know if it was because of something I hadn't done yet. I understood that better than I expected. There are moments in life when you look at someone older and wonder if they are warning you, or if they are simply what you're becoming without knowing it. "What do you think the warning was?" I asked. Noah looked into the cup, watching the steam fade like it was carrying thoughts he couldn't say out loud. "I think he wanted me to see it," he whispered. "Not on purpose, not directly, but I think that version of me sat there because it was the only way I'd believe what I'm capable of losing." He lifted his eyes slowly, and there was something steady and fragile in them, like a candle that refused to go out, even in the wind. "And if that's true," he said softly, "then I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that." I could see the question behind Noah's eyes, even if he didn't dare say it aloud. What if the person he saw wasn't just a version of himself, but the most honest one? The thought held him like a shadow that refused to loosen its grip. I didn't want to push him toward fear, but I also couldn't pretend his experience was something simple, not when the way he described it carried the weight of truth. "You don't have to figure everything out tonight," I said. "Some things take time to settle." He let out a faint breath that was neither agreement nor disagreement, just exhaustion wearing the shape of acceptance. His hands were still wrapped around the cup, but the tea had gone cold. He didn't seem to mind. I think he just needed to hold on to something. Do you ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something? He asked suddenly. Like one wrong step and everything changes? I sat with the question before answering. The honest reply wasn't simple. I think everyone feels that at some point, I said. Most people just don't admit it. He nodded, but the worry didn't fade. He looked around the kitchen as if expecting the room to shift the way the road had earlier. I noticed the way his gaze lingered on the walls, the door, the edges of the table, checking that everything still belonged to the present. I don't know why I ended up there, he said quietly. I wasn't trying to go anywhere. I wasn't trying to escape. His voice tightened on that last word. I wondered what he meant by it, whether he was talking about town or his father, or something deeper he didn't yet have words for. You said he, your older self, was looking for something, I reminded him. Do you think it was connected to you, or something else? He rubbed his forehead. It felt personal, not like he lost an object. It was like he lost a part of himself. The phrasing made the room feel smaller. He kept staring at the ground like he expected something to be there. Noah continued. Something important. But the way he looked, I don't think he ever found it. The snow outside pressed harder against the windows, the flakes dancing in gusts. The world had grown quieter, as if it knew our conversation wasn't meant for outside ears. Noah looked down again, but this time his expression changed, confusion slipping into something else. He reached toward his jacket pocket slowly, like he hadn't noticed something before. What is it? I asked. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, old, yellowed around the edges, one corner torn. He stared at it like it didn't belong to him. I don't remember putting this in here, he said. The air in the room shifted, not a supernatural shift, just the kind that happens when two people realize something is about to matter. He held the paper between his fingers for a moment before opening it. Inside was a small handwritten line, barely legible, written in shaky handwriting. You dropped this. Nothing else. No signature. No date. Is it yours? I asked carefully. He shook his head. I've never seen this. And the handwriting? He swallowed. I don't think it's his either. Not the older me. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with possibility. Where do you think it came from? I finally asked. Noah set the note gently on the table, as if it might break. I don't know, he said, but it wasn't in my pocket before I went there. The heater clicked again, trying to fight the cold pressing against the windows. Neither of us moved. It's not mine, he repeated, softer this time. And if it's not his, then someone else was there. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in him yet, fear mixed with understanding, a kind that doesn't come from danger, but from finally realizing something bigger is unfolding. Caleb, he whispered, I think someone handed this to me, and I didn't feel it happen. The snow kept falling steady and soundless, while the truth settled between us. One neither of us knew how to name yet, but whatever Noah had seen in that place, it hadn't just been himself. Noah stared at the note as if it might change if he blinked. The small, uneven handwriting looked older than the paper itself, shaky, almost desperate. I'd seen that kind of handwriting before, the kind that belongs to someone trying to write in a hurry or in fear, but I had never imagined I would see it in this context, placed quietly in the hands of a boy who had seen his own future break. He didn't touch it again. It lay between us, still as a fallen leaf on a frozen pond, carrying more weight than the few words on it should have. The room grew quiet around us, settling into a stillness that made every breath sound heavier. What if it wasn't left for him? Noah said after a long silence. What if it was left for me? Now. I didn't answer immediately. The snow against the window blurred into soft streaks, pushed sideways by the wind. It made the outside look like a world half erased. A fitting backdrop for the conversation we were trapped in. Let's not jump too far ahead, I said gently. We don't know when it was written, or why. He glanced upward, unsure whether to believe me or himself. But I felt something when I came back, he said. Like something brushed past me, like a hand or a shadow. His voice broke slightly on the last word. I leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, keeping my tone calm. Tell me exactly how it felt. Noah closed his eyes to remember. It was cold, but not like the air. More like touching something that isn't supposed to be touched. Something that moves differently. He opened his eyes again, and his expression tightened. When I landed back on the road, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I was shaking, but I didn't feel alone. His words hung in the air long enough to draw a quiet tremor through me. Not fear, not yet, but alertness. The kind that comes when your instincts start listening more carefully than your thoughts. I picked up the note slowly, turning it just slightly under the kitchen light. The ink was faded but not smudged, as if whatever wrote it had written it long ago but kept it safe somewhere untouched. The handwriting was irregular, some letters pressed hard, others barely making contact with the page. "You dropped this," I read aloud. Hearing the words spoken made them feel heavier. Noah drew in a shaky breath. "What did I drop?" he whispered. "What am I missing?" I set the note back down. "Maybe it wasn't about an object," I said softly. "Maybe it was about a moment, or a part of yourself." He looked at me with the same expression he had when he arrived at my door. Fear mixed with confusion, the kind that tells you someone is still falling even though they're sitting still. "I didn't drop anything," he said. "Nothing. I didn't even have my notebook with me. I didn't have anything." His certainty made the room feel colder. Small details matter when you're dealing with something you don't understand. "You said he was looking at the ground," I reminded him. "Your older self." Noah nodded. "What if what he was looking for wasn't there yet?" I asked. "What if the thing that's supposed to be dropped happens later?" He froze, not in fear but in realization. A quiet, hollow realization that stretched between us. "What if it's not something he lost?" he said slowly. "What if it's something I'm going to lose?" His voice trembled. Whatever he imagined losing, it hurt him before it even happened. Outside, the wind changed direction again, rattling a loose piece of siding near the porch. It sounded almost like a knock. Noah flinched. I stood and walked to the window, checking the yard, the fences, the dark line where the road disappeared into the snow. Nothing moved, nothing changed. Just a quiet Idaho night, pretending it wasn't holding its breath. "You're safe here," I said, though part of me wasn't sure what he needed safety from. He nodded slowly, but the uncertainty didn't leave his eyes. "I don't want to go back out there tonight," he admitted. "Not after what happened." "You don't have to," I said. "Stay as long as you need." The relief in his expression was faint but real, but behind it the fear remained, quiet, steady, patient. The kind of fear that doesn't leave when the snow melts. Noah took a long, steady breath and let his shoulders drop a little, though the tension didn't fully leave him. I could tell he was trying to hold himself together in a way he wasn't used to. People his age often carry their worries loudly, visible, sharp, close to the surface. But Noah carried his quietly, tucked into the spaces between his words, like someone used to shrinking himself so his fear wouldn't spread to others. I poured him a bit more hot water, though he didn't drink it. He just held the cup, letting the heat settle into his palms. It seemed to help him stay here, in this room, in this moment, rather than drifting back into a future he didn't understand. "What do you think I should do?" he asked, not looking at me but at the reflection of the kitchen light in the small puddle on the table. His voice was softer than before. "I mean, how do I stop myself from turning into him?" I didn't answer right away. Advice can land like a burden if you give it too quickly. And I knew he wasn't asking for a plan. He was asking for permission to hope. "You're not him," I said gently. "You've seen one version of yourself, not all of them." He rubbed his thumb along the handle of the cup. "But what if time doesn't care about versions? What if it just happens that way?" I leaned back, letting the quiet settle between us before speaking again. "Then why show you at all?" I asked. "If it was fixed, if nothing could change, what would be the point of letting you see it?" He looked up at me for the first time since we started talking, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not confidence, but the faintest flicker of possibility. "You think it could change?" he asked. "I think most things can," I said, "especially if they're not meant to break you, but to warn you." He held on to that thought the way someone holds onto a railing in the dark. After a moment, he reached for his jacket pocket again, pulling the folded note closer. He stared at it as if waiting to see whether it would explain itself. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this," he said. "It doesn't make sense." "Maybe it's not supposed to make sense yet," I said. "Sometimes meaning shows up later." He pressed the note gently between his fingers, careful not to crease it further. "Do you think it's from someone else?" he asked. "Someone I didn't see?" The question carried a strange weight, like he already suspected the answer but needed to hear it spoken aloud. "I think," I said carefully, That the door you heard might matter. His eyes stayed fixed on the paper. It didn't sound like a door to a house, he said. More like a shed or a storage room. Something old. And did your older self react to it? Noah shook his head. Not the sound. But when he lifted his head, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking toward that door. A thin chill slid down my spine. Not fear, just the awareness that something was beginning to connect, even if the pieces were still scattered. What if someone else was there with him? He whispered. Not someone I know. Not someone I could see. The heater clicked on again, sending warmth through the room. But it didn't touch the cold feeling inside his words. I didn't feel threatened, he added quickly. It wasn't like that. It felt more like someone watching, someone aware of me being there even when I wasn't supposed to be. He swallowed, then continued. And when I came back, when everything tightened, I think that's when the note appeared, like it was handed to me right before I left. He placed the note gently back on the table, as if setting down something fragile. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't feel a hand, but I felt presence. I didn't rush him. I just let the quiet sit. Caleb, he said softly, what if the future isn't empty? What if I wasn't alone in that place? And neither was he. The snow outside had begun to fall heavier, the sky dimming into a deeper shade. It felt like the world itself was bracing for what Noah was starting to realize. Whatever he had seen on that road, it wasn't finished with him yet. Noah stayed quiet for a long time after that, as if speaking the thought out loud had changed the air in the room. His gaze moved slowly across the kitchen, table, chair, cupboards, window, as if checking that each object was still part of the present. I'd seen that look before in people who'd been through something overwhelming, a checking of boundaries, a way of making sure the world hadn't shifted again while they weren't looking. Do you think someone followed me back? He finally asked. His voice was steady, but the question wasn't. It wavered in the air, searching for a place to land. I don't think anything followed you, I said carefully, but I think something noticed you. I paused, and that's different. He nodded slowly, though he didn't seem comforted. His hands rested on the table, fingers slightly curled, like they were holding onto something invisible. The note lay between us, small and quiet, but carrying a presence neither of us wanted to disturb. I just keep trying to understand why me, he said. Why would I be pulled into something like that? I haven't done anything. I'm not special. I leaned forward slightly. Maybe it's not about being special, I said. Maybe it's about timing. He let that sit for a moment. The kitchen light flickered once, not in a dramatic way, just the old house kind of flicker that happens when the wind shifts outside. But the timing pulled Noah's attention. He looked up sharply, then forced himself to relax. I don't like this feeling, he said. This sense that something's unfinished. It is unfinished, I said calmly. And maybe that's why you came back, to finish what your older self couldn't. He let out a small, unsteady breath. But I don't even know what that is. We'll figure it out, I said. But you won't do it alone. That seemed to settle something in him, even if just for a moment. He glanced again at the note. When I touched it, he said quietly, right after I came back, the paper felt warm. The words hit the room differently. Warm. That wasn't a detail that belonged to something dropped on a cold road or tucked in a pocket for years. Warm meant presence. Warm meant contact. Warm? I repeated, making sure I'd heard him right. He nodded. Warm, like it had just been held. The kitchen felt smaller again, as if the walls had leaned in a few inches. Do you think your older self gave it to you? I asked. Noah shook his head. No, he wasn't looking at me. He didn't even react when I tried to move. And the door? I asked. Do you think the sound came from there? His expression darkened slightly, not in fear, but in thought. I think the door was connected to whoever wrote the note, he said. Not to him. He swallowed. When it closed, that's when the air changed. And when I came back, the note was already there. The wind pressed harder against the house, and somewhere outside a tree branch scraped against the siding. The sound made Noah tense, but he didn't look away from me. What if whoever closed that door, he said, didn't want me staying in that future? What if that's why I got pulled back? I considered that. Not because it was frightening, but because it was plausible in the way strange things can sometimes be. The future he described didn't sound welcoming. It sounded tired, empty, abandoned. But a door closing implied intention, direction, boundaries being set. Maybe someone was protecting you, I said softly. He blinked, surprised, not because the idea was comforting, but because it hadn't occurred to him. Protecting me from what? He asked. That, I said gently, might be what we're supposed to understand next. Noah exhaled slowly, a breath he'd been holding for longer than he realized. The snow outside thickened, turning the world into a muted white landscape. The only sounds left were the steady hum of the heater and the occasional sigh of wind against the window, a quiet rhythm like time catching its breath. Noah looked at the note one more time, then carefully folded it back up, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Do you think this is the first time this has happened? He asked. I looked at him, at the fear and exhaustion layered in his voice. No, I said softly. I don't think it is. His eyes widened, not in panic, but in recognition, like he already knew the truth and just needed someone to say it. And outside, the night deepened, quiet, patient, as if waiting for whatever came next. I didn't ask Noah any more questions that night, not because I was afraid of the answers, but because I could see he was reaching the edge of what he could hold. There are times when the mind refuses to absorb anything else, when even the truth needs to wait its turn. That's the state he was in, fragile, stretched thin, like a string pulled too tight. So I got up, walked to the hallway closet, and grabbed the old blanket I kept from my mother's house. It was frayed at the corners, soft from age, the kind of blanket that carried a warmth deeper than fabric. When I handed it to him, his shoulders eased a little. You can stay here tonight, I said. No pressure, no questions, just rest. He nodded, grateful in a quiet way, and wrapped the blanket around himself. For the first time since he'd arrived, he looked less like someone outrunning a future, and more like someone who wanted to pause long enough to breathe. I pulled a spare pillow from the sofa and set it down, then dimmed the kitchen light. The house immediately felt calmer. The shadows softened. The snow outside muffled everything beyond the walls. It was the kind of night that usually brought peace. But tonight, peace was harder to find. As I walked back toward the table, I noticed Noah staring at his hands, turning them palm up again as if they carried an answer he'd missed. The motion was slow, methodical, like he was checking for something that could only be seen in the right moment. You okay? I asked softly. He nodded, but not with conviction. I just keep wondering, he said, if he, my older self, felt the same way. If he had nights like this, if he tried to make sense of it. That version of you might have, I said, but you're not him. Noah looked down again. I hope not. He folded the blanket a little tighter around himself. Then, almost without thinking, he reached into his pocket and checked for the note again, as if afraid it might disappear the way it had appeared. When he felt the folded paper, he relaxed slightly, though the tension never left his eyes. I sat across from him, and neither of us spoke for a while. The silence felt full, not empty, full of questions too delicate to touch. Outside, the wind changed direction again, the snow drifting sideways. The sound of it against the window made the house feel smaller, like the night was pressing in. Eventually, Noah lifted his head. Caleb, he said, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were younger, did you ever have something you cared about? Something that felt like it could change your life? I let the question sit for a moment. The kind of answer he needed wasn't quick or simple. I did, I said quietly. Something I loved. Something that made me feel like the world opened up instead of closing in. He leaned forward slightly. What happened? I exhaled. Life happened. Responsibility. Fear. People who didn't understand what it meant to me. I met his eyes. And one day, I realized I'd stopped trying. Not because the dream was wrong, but because I got tired of defending it. Noah's gaze softened. Did you regret it? Every now and then? I admitted. But regret doesn't change what already slipped away. It only changes how you look at what comes next. He absorbed that in silence. His breathing slowed, becoming more even. I could tell he wasn't asking about me. Not really. He was asking about the path he feared becoming his own. I don't want to quit, he said quietly. I don't want that version of me to be real. Then don't let him be, I said. Whatever you saw, it doesn't have to define you. He nodded, but I could see he wasn't convinced yet. Not fully. He glanced at the dark window again, his expression tightening for a brief second. Not fear, more like uncertainty, as if expecting something to shift beyond the glass. "Did you see something?" I asked. He shook his head quickly. "No, just making sure I'm still here." And the way he said it, soft, almost ashamed, told me everything I needed to know. Whatever he'd seen on that road wasn't just haunting him. It was following him in ways he couldn't yet explain. Noah eventually leaned back on the sofa, pulling the blanket up to his chest. His eyes were heavy, though I could tell his mind was wide awake behind them. It was the expression of someone trying to rest in a world that refuses to let them. I dimmed the living room lamp until only a faint amber glow remained. The house felt calmer that way, softer, like it was trying its best to hold him together. I sat in the armchair across from him, not wanting to leave him alone with whatever thoughts drifted in and out. Sometimes presence helps more than words. For a while, the only sounds were the gentle whir of the heater and the faint hissing of the snow pressing against the windows. Idaho has a way of making winter nights feel both comforting and isolating at the same time. "Do you think time notices us?" Noah asked suddenly, his voice low. It wasn't a question I expected, but it didn't surprise me either. Not after everything he'd described. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shifted a little, staring at the ceiling. "I keep remembering something that didn't make sense. When I first saw him, older me, it didn't feel like I stumbled into a moment. It felt like the moment was already waiting for me." I let his words sink in slowly. The phrasing didn't come from fear. It came from clarity, the kind that arrives only after the chaos settles. "Moments aren't supposed to wait," he whispered. "No," I said gently. "They're not." He pulled the blanket closer, burying his hands under it as if trying to hide the trembling he couldn't fully control. I can't stop thinking about that door," he said. The sound of it closing. How it felt like everything changed right after. "Was it loud?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "That's the strangest part. It was soft, gentle, the kind of sound you'd only notice if you were already listening for something." A small shiver ran through him. "And then the air tightened," he added, "like the world was pulling away from me." He paused, breathing carefully, as if saying the words brought back the sensation. "I think something is connected to that door," he said. "Something that isn't me. Something that isn't him either." I didn't speak. Some truths grow clearer in silence. After a moment, Noah continued. "When I picture it now, the place where he sat, I don't think it was just abandoned. I think it used to be important to me." "What makes you say that?" I asked. He frowned slightly, trying to form the thought. The room felt familiar, not in a nostalgic way. More like I had been there before I knew I'd be. His voice faltered, uncertain. "Does that even make sense?" It did, just not in any way that belonged to ordinary life. "Memory works strangely around strong emotions," I said. "Sometimes the past and future rhyme with each other." He nodded faintly, though I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. A gust of wind struck the side of the house hard enough to rattle the window panes. Noah jumped, shoulders tensing. His breath caught for a second before he exhaled slowly. "Sorry," he whispered. "You don't have to apologize," I said. "Your nerves have been through something no one should face alone." He glanced toward the front door, as if checking whether it was still closed. "I keep thinking it's going to open," he admitted. "Not because someone is outside, but because something might want to come through." The honesty in his voice made the air in the room feel heavier. "You're safe here," I repeated, keeping my tone steady. "Whatever you saw, whatever was there, you're not in that place anymore." He nodded, though the uncertainty stayed in his eyes. "I know I'm here," he said, "but it doesn't feel like I came back alone." I didn't move, didn't breathe for a moment. His words weren't hysterical. They weren't dramatic. They were steady, careful, the way someone speaks when they're telling the truth they've been avoiding. A long silence stretched between us. Outside, the wind eased for a moment, giving the snow a chance to fall straight again. "Noah," I said softly, "what makes you feel that way?" He swallowed hard. "Because ever since I got back," he whispered, "I feel like the air behind me is watching." I didn't respond right away, not because I doubted him, but because his words carried a kind of truth that didn't need to be questioned. Some feelings arrive with a clarity too sharp to ignore, and this one made the small hairs on my arms rise. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep the air between us steady. "What do you mean by that?" I asked quietly. Noah shifted under the blanket, pulling his knees closer to his chest. He wasn't trembling anymore, not outwardly. The fear was deeper now, quieter, sitting heavy inside him like it had finally found a place to settle. "It's like there's a space behind me that isn't empty," he said. "Not exactly a presence, not exactly a void, just attention." He looked toward the hallway, not at anything in particular, just the shadowed stretch of it. The house was still, but something in his posture made me look too, even though I knew nothing would be there. "Did you feel it right when you came back?" I asked. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It started later, after the shock faded a little, when I tried to breathe normally again. That's when I felt it." He hesitated, then added, "It feels like the moment didn't close all the way." That sentence settled into the room with the same heaviness as snowfall piling on a roof. Slow, quiet, certain. "You said the door closed softly," I said. "Do you think it shut completely?" His eyes drifted to the floor. "I don't know. I don't think I was supposed to be there long enough to find out." The wind outside shifted again, this time softer. The snow brushed the window in a steady rhythm, almost calming. But inside, the atmosphere felt tight, the kind of tightness that appears when someone is trying to make sense of something far larger than they're ready to understand. "What if the door wasn't closing behind you?" I said. "What if it was closing behind something else?" Noah looked up sharply, not scared, just struck by the idea. His expression tightened, not in alarm, but in recognition, like part of him had been circling around that same thought without wanting to touch it. "I don't think whatever was there wanted to follow me," he said, "but I think it saw me." The honesty in his voice settled deep in the room. "What do you think it was?" I asked. He took a long breath. "I don't know. It didn't feel human." "Not exactly. Not like a person you'd talk to in a room. More like a memory standing upright. Something built out of a moment instead of a body." His hands tightened around the blanket. "When I looked at the older me," he continued, "he looked broken. But whatever was behind that door, and it didn't feel broken. It felt aware." The word lingered in the air. "You didn't see it?" I asked. "I didn't have to," he said softly. "I felt it, like it was waiting for him to move, or waiting for me to understand something." I leaned back in the chair, trying to keep my breathing calm. There was nothing violent in his description, no aggression, no danger, just awareness. But awareness itself can be unsettling, especially when it comes from something that doesn't belong to your own time. "Noah," I said gently, "what did you feel when it looked at you?" He swallowed, thinking. "Small," he said, not in a bad way. "Just like I was standing in front of something older than me, older than anything I knew." His voice lowered, and I think it knew I didn't belong there. The heater clicked on again, filling the space with a low hum. It helped, barely. "Do you think it meant harm?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "It didn't feel like that. It felt curious." He hesitated, and a little sad. That last word caught me off guard. Sad. He nodded slowly, like it had seen this all before. A quiet settled between us. Not heavy, not cold, just still. The kind of stillness you get when two people realize they've stepped into something neither of them can name yet. Noah lowered his head, closing his eyes for a moment. "I'm so tired, Caleb," he whispered. "You're safe to rest," I said. He let out a long breath, letting the blanket fall loosely around him, and finally allowed his body to relax into the sofa. But even as he drifted toward sleep, his hand stayed close to the pocket with the note, as if some part of him knew the night wasn't done speaking. Noah fell asleep not long after that. It wasn't the deep, peaceful kind of sleep people slip into after a long day. It was the kind the body forces onto you when the mind is exhausted. His breathing settled into an uneven rhythm at first, then slowly smoothed out. I stayed in the chair across from him, watching the slow rise and fall of the blanket around his shoulders, making sure the tremor in his hands finally faded. The house felt different with him asleep, not quieter, just more aware. Like the walls had grown still on purpose, holding their breath so he could rest. I didn't turn on any new lights. I didn't move around. I just sat there, letting the night stretch around us. Outside, the storm had deepened. Snow came down in thick, heavy curtains, swallowing the yard, the fence, the road. The world beyond the windows looked erased, replaced by a soft white that hid everything except the faint orange glow of a distant street lamp. The quiet was deep, almost physical. A kind that presses against you rather than just surrounds you. I leaned back slightly and exhaled. It had been a long time since I'd felt responsible for someone. Too long, maybe. But watching Noah curl into himself like that, trying to trust a space enough to rest, it brought back a memory of a younger version of me. Someone who also wanted a place to set down the weight he carried. Someone who didn't get that chance at the time. I rubbed my hands together for warmth. Though the room wasn't cold, the heater was doing its job. The feeling came from something else. A reminder, maybe, that the strange part of Noah's night wasn't as distant as he hoped. My eyes drifted to the note on the table. "You dropped this." The handwriting still sat there, fragile and slanted, as if written by someone whose hand had forgotten steadiness. I picked it up carefully, not wanting to disturb whatever imprint the moment had left on it. The paper was cold now, cold enough that I wondered again how it could have felt warm earlier when Noah first returned. I turned it over. Nothing on the back. No marks. No hint of when it had been written. No clue who had put it in his pocket. But the edge of the paper, there was something faint on it. A thin line of dust. Old dust. The kind that collects on unused surfaces. The kind you'd find in a forgotten place, not on a road or a jacket. "Where did you come from?" I whispered. The house didn't answer, and I didn't expect it to. But the question hung there like a breath held in the dark. I set the note back down and tried to think clearly, though the night made every thought feel heavier. Noah had stumbled into a moment that wasn't meant for him. He'd seen a future version of himself, broken in a way that frightened him more deeply than anything else could. And something else, someone else, had been present in that future too. Something behind that door. Something aware. I kept staring at the hallway. I don't know why. Maybe because that was the quietest part of the house. Or maybe because Noah kept glancing that way earlier, as if something in the shadows made him uneasy. But nothing moved. No sound. No shift. Just an ordinary hallway in an ordinary house on an extraordinary night. Eventually, I let out a slow breath and closed my eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to rest them. But before my mind drifted too far, I heard something faint. A sound. Not from the front door. Not from outside. Not from the heater. A soft, delicate sound. Almost like paper shifting. I opened my eyes quickly. The note lay exactly where I'd left it, but the air felt different, just slightly, enough to make the room feel a few degrees colder. I watched it for a long moment, waiting to see if it would move again, waiting to understand whether the sound had been real or just a trick of a tired mind. Noah stirred in his sleep, pulling the blanket closer, his brow tightening for a second before smoothing out again. The house went still once more, but the moment didn't leave me. Something had happened, small enough to ignore, significant enough not to. I stayed still for a long time after that faint sound, listening to the silence, trying to decide whether it belonged to the house or to something else. Old houses make noises. You learn that after living in one long enough. Wood expands in the cold, pipes settle, the heater breathes. But this sound, this one had direction. It had intention, like something shifting just enough to remind me it was there. I waited for another sign. Nothing came, just the wind brushing the siding and the soft, muffled hush of snowfall outside. I told myself I was overtired, that the weight of Noah's story had made me read too deeply into things, but my body didn't completely believe it. There's a kind of awareness that settles in your chest when the world doesn't feel entirely yours anymore. A quiet tightening that doesn't fade. I leaned forward and slid the note a few inches to the center of the table. Nothing happened. The paper stayed still. Ordinary. But even as I watched it, I couldn't shake the thought that someone had touched it before it reached us. Someone who didn't belong in any moment I understood. A soft sound pulled my attention away. Noah shifted on the sofa, not waking, just adjusting his weight. His hand slid out from under the blanket and brushed lightly against the cushion, fingers curling inward as if searching for something. His brow creased. A quiet, uneasy sound escaped him. I walked over slowly and crouched beside him. "Noah," I whispered. "You're okay. You're here." He didn't open his eyes, but his breathing eased slightly. I pulled the blanket back over his shoulder and stayed there for a few moments, watching his chest rise and fall. The quiet around him felt fragile, like it could break at the slightest touch. That's when I noticed something. His jacket, draped over the arm of the sofa, wasn't lying the way I remembered placing it. The right sleeve hung farther down than before, angled toward the floor as if someone had tugged on it gently. I stared at it, unsure whether I had made a mistake earlier. Maybe I had moved it without thinking. Maybe it had slipped on its own. But it didn't look like it had slipped. It looked like it had been pulled. I reached for the fabric and lifted it. The sleeve felt cold. Not the natural cold of a winter night, but a deeper one. Like a pocket of air had been sitting inside it long enough to forget warmth. A quiet unease settled in my stomach. I draped the jacket neatly over the back of the sofa this time and stepped back, trying to steady my breathing. The house was still again, the kind of stillness that feels like someone holding a breath. When I turned back toward the table, the note caught my eye once more. I wasn't imagining it. The fold on the corner was softer now, slightly more crumpled, as if someone had pinched it between two fingers. My pulse quickened, but I kept my movements slow. Fear rushes. Understanding doesn't. I reached out and touched the edge of the note. Cold. Not cold from the air. Cold from absence. From something that had borrowed the moment before returning it. I closed my eyes for a second, grounding myself. The floor under my feet was solid. The heater hummed. Snow pressed against the windows. All familiar. All real. I opened my eyes again. Noah's breathing changed slightly, an exhale that trembled at the end. He wasn't awake, but his dream had pulled him somewhere uneasy. I moved closer and rested a hand lightly on the back of the sofa. "You're safe," I whispered again. The words felt thin, even to me. A soft creak sounded from the hallway, not loud enough to be footsteps, not sharp enough to be the house shifting. It was softer, a brushing sound, like fabric dragging lightly against a doorframe. I turned my head slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the dim. The hallway was empty, just shadows, just quiet, but the air there looked heavier, like the dark had deepened by a shade. I didn't move toward it. Not because I was afraid, but because something in me understood instinctively that the space didn't want to be approached. Not yet. Instead, I sat back down in the chair, keeping Noah in sight, keeping the hallway in my peripheral vision. The snow continued falling outside, but inside the house, time felt stretched thin, like one wrong sound might tear it open again. And somewhere in that thinness, something waited, not threatening, not welcoming, just aware. Watching the night the way Noah said it watched him. I kept my eyes on the hallway longer than I meant to. The darkness there didn't move. It didn't shift or stretch or breathe, but it held a kind of presence I couldn't shake. A quiet awareness, patient and observing. The kind of presence that doesn't need to be seen to be felt. Eventually, I forced myself to look away. Noah needed calm, not fear feeding fear. I turned my focus back to him, asleep on the sofa, the blanket rising and falling with each breath. His face had softened in sleep, but not fully. There was still tension in his brow, a shadow of whatever dream pulled at him beneath the surface. I stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen, giving myself something to do. The wooden floorboards creaked softly under my feet, a familiar sound, grounding in its predictability. I poured a glass of water and took a slow sip, hoping it would settle the tightness in my chest. It helped, but only slightly. When I looked back toward the living room, Noah's fingers twitched against the blanket, a small motion, involuntary. But the expression on his face tightened for a second, like he was seeing something he didn't want to see. I set the glass down and moved toward him. "Noah," I whispered, keeping my voice steady. "You're safe. You're here." He didn't wake, but the tension in his body eased a little at the sound of my voice. I rested my hand lightly on the blanket near his shoulder. A grounding presence, nothing more. For a moment, I thought the night might settle again, but then I noticed something. The hallway didn't look darker anymore. It looked deeper, as if it extended farther than it should. Not physically, just perceptually, like the shadows were stretching themselves quietly, rearranging the edges of the familiar. I blinked, and it looked normal again. I blinked again, and it still looked normal. But the moment lingered like a breath I hadn't fully released. I returned to the chair across from Noah and tried to calm my mind. Maybe exhaustion was distorting things. Maybe the strain of the night was doing what fear often does, making ordinary darkness look sentient. But the thought didn't settle, because even if the hallway was ordinary, the moment that brought Noah here wasn't. I watched him breathe, his chest rising and falling. Slowly the room softened again. The snow's steady hush pressed gently against the windows. The heater's warmth filled the quiet spaces. For a moment it felt manageable. Then Noah whispered something in his sleep. At first I didn't catch it. Just sound, soft, caught inside a dream. But then he whispered again, clearer this time. "Don't leave it." My stomach tightened. I leaned closer. "What did you say?" I whispered. His brow tightened, his lips barely moving. "Don't leave it on the ground." The words were faint but distinct. I felt the air shift inside my chest. It wasn't fear exactly, just a cold thread pulling through me, running from the memory of the note on the table to the older version of him Noah had seen searching the dirt. "Don't leave it," he repeated, quieter now. I sat back slowly. "Be cautious," I told myself. These could just be dreams replaying themselves. Minds relive trauma in strange ways. It didn't need to be more than that. But the words didn't feel random. They felt placed, almost delivered. I glanced at the note again, still resting where I'd left it. Nothing had changed, but something about it felt heavier now. The heater clicked, and the sound startled me more than it should have. The tension in my shoulders made every small noise feel sharper, as if the house had become a conductor for all the quiet things Noah carried back with him. When I leaned forward to straighten the blanket around him, Noah's hand brushed mine. His fingers were cold, even under all that warmth. He murmured something else, but this time the words didn't form. Just a sound, soft, strained, as if trapped inside whatever dream he was trying to escape. I didn't push him to wake. I didn't shake him. I just stayed close, grounding him. "You're here," I whispered. "Stay with this moment, not the other one." The house grew still again. The snow kept falling. The darkness in the hallway held its breath, and for the first time that night, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not fear, not confusion, not even curiosity. A quiet understanding. Whatever Noah saw in that future, whatever followed him back in feeling, not form. It wasn't finished speaking. Morning came slowly, the way it always does after a heavy snow. Light gathered in soft layers along the windows, turning the living room pale and quiet. Noah was still asleep on the sofa, the blanket pulled up to his chin. His breathing was calm, steady in a way it hadn't been the night before. For a moment I just watched him, grateful for the small peace he'd found, even if it was temporary. I walked to the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee, letting the warmth settle into my hands. The house no longer felt tense, but it didn't feel normal either. There was a faint stillness in the air, like something had stepped aside just long enough for us to rest. A pause, not an ending. When I looked toward the table, the note was still there. "You dropped this." Nothing about it had changed, but it felt different in the morning light. Not less strange, just more real, like part of the room now instead of an intrusion. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Its meaning had already lodged itself somewhere deeper than paper. Eventually Noah woke. He blinked at the ceiling for a long moment before sitting up slowly, as if unsure the room would stay in place. When he saw me, he managed a small, tired smile. But I could tell he remembered everything. The fear, the shifting air, the older version of himself sitting alone, the unseen awareness behind that door. "What do I do now?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. Maybe he didn't need one. Maybe the warning wasn't something to solve, but something to carry, quietly, carefully, like a truth that changes how you walk through your own life. I told him the only thing I knew for certain. "You move forward," I said, "and you don't leave the important things behind." He nodded, holding the blanket a little tighter. Outside, the world was white and new, but the feeling in the air stayed the same. Some moments don't end. They just wait.